Okay, everyone. So we're going to begin our lecture. You may know that Dr. King is holding a Pulses class this weekend. So they're breaking for lunch. In the meantime, we'll be having the lecture. And I'm going to try to keep this about 30 minutes long. And if there are any questions at the end, we can do that. I wanted this lecture to be like a supplementary to the Pulses class that Dr. King is currently teaching right now. So I just wanted this to be sort of like a storytelling session from my perspective on Pulses. I'm going to show you a case that I worked on my PowerPoint, and I'll be telling you a story about how I used Pulses uh, to help me figure out what sequences I needed to do. And I wanted to give you my thought process on why I chose those sequences as well. So you may know in TKM, we learn about discerning pulses. And for me, and of course for Dr. King, pulses are the concept of discerning pulses is one of the most important things that you need to learn in TKM in order to really uh, make the most of uh, TKM and learning what are the most effective TKM applications based on the pulses that you feel. Of course, learning pulses isn't something that you can acquire right away, except for there are exceptions, of course. There are people who, get the concept of pulses right away. But for me, it takes a lot of exposure to feeling pulses, to uh, when you're working on different people, it really helps that you're feeling different pulses from different individuals. That's what I wanted to say. In order to really uh, master the differences between the textures. Okay, so in learning pulses, we know that there are different textures that we call. There are 5 basic textures. You have your puff, your pulse, tingle, gurgle, and then you have your fluff with tone. So those are our basic textures. So the Pulses class was actually the very first real TKM class that I attended in person when I went to Dallas from the Philippines. That was even before I attended a proper level 1 and 2 class. So Dr. King made an exception for me, special exception. And it was really, I think that really helped me learn pulses better, I would say, because that was my very first exposure. And the way he explained it, it was, I quickly understood the concept of it. Okay, so anyway, let's move on. If you have a TKM textbook, your level 1 and 2 textbook, we know that there's a section up there that talks about the pulses. And so here are the different textures from letter A. It used to be called fluff, if you look at the top part of the image, but Dr. King has changed it to puff because it's a puffed up sensation, and that's third stratum. And you have your pulse, letter B. That would be fifth stratum. So letter C would be your tingle. And letter D would be thud. Okay. Letter E would be gurgle. And finally, it all leads to fluff with tone. So there's a certain order of pulse textures that always happens. It's always in order. And it goes from I'll start from below. It goes from A, B, C, D, E, and then fluff with tone. So I just put those letters because it's based on the letters on the image in the book. So you have from fluff, pulse, tingle, thud, gurgle, and then it leads to fluff with tone. Or if we're talking about stratums, it goes from third stratum to fifth stratum to first to second to fourth, and then it goes to fluff with tone. And that's when you're feeling the pulses on the wrist. Okay? So I just wanted to cover the basics of it. In discerning pulses, since this is something that you need to physically feel, it's always difficult, even for Dr. King, to vocally or verbally describe the sensations of these textures, because sensations, what you're feeling is very, very subjective. So it's often difficult to describe what you're feeling in words so that other people can really see the same picture of what you're feeling, if you know what I mean. But I think Dr. King does a very good job of really describing using words that can really describe each texture. So starting with letter A, third stratum pulse, which is puff, it's as the word implies, it's a puffed up sensation. So it feels like a balloon expanding and deflating. So when you're feeling, when your fingers are on the wrist, it sort of gives a sensation of a balloon inflating or puffing up and deflating. And so I think that's actually a good description of it. Okay, and letter B would be your pulse. And Dr. King often describes this as a reverberating feeling, like when you're striking a bass drum. When you strike it and it reverberates, or it has it has a vibration at the end of it. So I often say boom, 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 something like that. It's like a cardiovascular pulse. It's your typical cardiovascular pulse that usually the nurse or the doctors feel. Okay. Letter C would be your tingle sensation or tingle texture, and that corresponds to first stratum. And it's often an electric-like sensation. So when you're feeling it, sometimes it comes out like a zap. But I think Evan also brought this up before when we were attending the same classes before. He gave a really good description of it. It's for him, it was like running your fingers through soil, and that static feeling that you feel, that clammy electrical sensation that you feel after you rub your hands on soil. So that's actually a very good description of a tingle sensation. So it's a very cold, clammy, and electrifying sensation. And then fourth, you have your thud, which is second stratum texture. And thud, for me, is a very flat kind of texture. It's also like when you're striking a drum, but you have your hand on the surface of the drum, so that when you're striking, there's no reverberation. It's just a flat pulse. Okay, boom, 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 instead of boom, 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 boom. So that to me would be thud. And fifth would be gurgle, which is your fourth stratum texture. And sometimes that to me, the way I would describe it is like it's a very held back, or it's a lacking kind of sensation, and there's occasional bubbles. Imagine putting your fingers on the surface of water, and occasionally there's some bubbles that pop out. That to me would be gurgle. So So that to me would be some basic word descriptions of these textures. So now moving on, I wanted to share with you my experience working on a client. I asked this person's permission if I could use their example. I can't name names. All I can say is this person's initials are GK. So that's a so anyway, a lot of people knew back then, and this was back in 2015, that his health concern was fourth stage melanoma, which is aggressive skin cancer. Of course, being fourth stage and with such an aggressive skin cancer, there were complications, notably metastatic nodules in several locations. So, meaning there were several small, small-sized masses already spread in different locations. And of course, because of that, there was also extreme pain in certain locations of his body. The treatment that GK wanted to go through was purely natural medicine and TKM exclusively. So that means no standardized medical intervention, namely chemotherapy or radiation or surgery and other standardized medical approaches. So this was purely all TKM, heavy on TKM and natural medicine. So meaning, natural supplements, addressing the nutrition, for example. So the date range when I was the one applying TKM between August to October 2015. So this was about 2 months and nearly daily, okay? Daily application, and location was in Dallas. All right. So I wanted to share with you my thought process on working on this project. And so you'll see why I started with, the first slide, which is the order of pulses, because you'll find that the trend or the pattern actually follows this order. So before I continue, I just wanted to say that, it's not, you will not always feel the order of pulse textures this way, because sometimes you can't even feel pulses when you're trying to discern the pulses of a person, and not feeling any pulses doesn't mean that there's something wrong with what you're doing, or there's something wrong with the client or with the person receiving TKM. It's actually something that you can also it's called no pulses. Okay, so it's also something that will give you more information. So if you can't feel anything, if I can't feel anything, I usually classify it as silent pulses. So that's the term, silent pulses. So that also tells you a lot. Okay, and it also gives you an idea of what to use or what applications to use. Now, it's not always that I feel all 5 pulses working on a person. Sometimes I only feel one predominant pulse. And sometimes it would change to a different texture. Or sometimes it's just one texture and then suddenly it jumps to fluff with tone. So it's really dependent on every individual and every project, and it changes on a day-to-day basis. So one day you will feel, for example, fluff with tone after working, let's say doing a really intensive session on someone, and then you feel fluff with tone and you're really happy and ecstatic. And then the next day, you feel the pulses before doing the TKM session again, and it's completely chaotic again. So it really depends on a daily basis, and that's completely normal because we are exposed to different environments, and the moment we're exposed to the environment, it has an effect on our pulses. Okay, so because this is cancer that I was working with, I just wanted to reiterate, and this is also based on what's written in the level 3 and 4 book on page 287. And what Dr. King always repeats over and over, all cancer is born from a dysfunction in second stratum. So the root of all cancer, according to TKM, is a dysfunction in second stratum. Okay? And the predominant texture all throughout when I was working on him was second stratum. So everything that I'll be giving you, all the information based on the pulses, were based on my as best as I could remember during that time, and also supported by some of my personal notes. Okay. So I just wanted to use his case because it's a very, a lot of you who are attending now may already know about what he went through during around that time, 2015. So yeah, it's so that you and I can relate. Okay. So here are the main TKM sequences I applied. More details to follow. So I just wanted to mention the main TKM applications that I used. And then on the next slide, I'll show you why I used these, okay? And based on the pulses. Okay, so first was third method of correction. So this is from the level 3 and 4 book. And this is at least once daily for 21 consecutive days, and actually even more. Okay, so I was trying to look for this in the manuals or in the textbooks, but I couldn't really find it. I think it was based on my notes whenever I would attend Dr. King's classes. But Dr. King, you'll find Dr. King say this, especially during when he talks about the third method of correction, that consecutive applications for 21 times, 21 consecutive times, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to keep doing this session over and over in one day, for example. No, you can space this out. It could be on a daily basis if that's the frequency of when you're working with someone, or it could be, it really depends. But if you apply it for 21 consecutive times, it has a very, very powerful effect, especially against a lot of dysfunctions and disharmony like cancer. Okay, so in my case, when I was working, I would work on him twice a day, every day. Okay, so I would make sure that at least one of those sessions per day would be a third method of correction for at least 21 consecutive days, or sorry, 21 consecutive applications. So I don't want to confuse you with days, because this is really more of consecutive applications. Okay. Second would be the R&R application. So revitalizing and restoring the what do you call these? These are based on the level 3 and 4 book as well. So it's it's revitalizing and redirecting. I always mix that up. Sorry. R&R stands for revitalizing and redirecting the energy of a stratum. So there's one for each stratum. There are 5 stratums that we're working with. So you have R&R first, R&R second, R&R third, fourth, and fifth. Okay. So this one in particular, we apply it in reverse order. So we're doing all 5 R&R applications, starting from R&R fifth stratum, then going down. So R&R fifth, R&R fourth, R&R third, R&R second, R&R first, all in one session. Okay. So this takes longer than 1 hour. Usually it would take about an hour and a half at least. Okay, so it could take longer depending on how long each step takes for you. And that is from reference would be page 293 of the level 3 and 4 book. It's where it's mentioned that you can use this kind of application in reverse order, especially for cancer. Okay. And then I did fourth stratum application. So that includes R&R fourth stratum, the 23-25 combination for, of course, that is very powerful for the immune system. And we have regeneration, special regeneration sequence, which uh, it's actually found in the advanced level textbook. You have different levels, but Dr. King has a special advanced level that you can only attend after certain prerequisites. But he also included it at the back of your flip book, your TKM application flip book, the 3x5. And he also added this in the missions textbook at the very last page. Okay. So very powerful sequence, especially it's a fourth stratum application. And also, I used a lot of kidney, spleen, and lung in order based on the lumbar circle diagram. So if you're familiar with the lumbar star, so I just wanted to show you this. I just took a picture of one of Dr. King's charts with the lumbar circle. You'll find, this star inside the circle. And what you do, depending on the project that you're working on, in this case, we were working a lot on second stratum because, of course, that's the root of cancer, and it's a dysfunction in second stratum. So you flip the star and make so I drew like a circle, a red circle with a face to make this section into the head. So we know where the head is and we know where the feet are. Okay, so imagine this like a person. So the head would be where second stratum the head would be where second stratum is. So you're working with lung and large intestine, and then you know where the feet are. Okay, so how we use the lumbar circle is first we work on the left foot. Okay, so the left foot, so this person is facing us. So the left foot would be where bladder and kidney are. And then that would be what's causing the problem with second stratum. And then we work on the right foot, which is where stomach and spleen are. That would be the supporter. It will help support second stratum. And then you work on the project itself, which is lung and large intestine. So that's why I mentioned kidney, spleen, and lung in order. So I would work on kidney first, and then spleen, and then lung, because these are all, ascending. So you work on the corresponding organ energy for ascending based on the lumbar circle. Okay, so that's where that is coming from. Okay, so here was the order of pulse textures that I felt while working within those 2 months. All right, and this is what I applied. So before I arrived in Dallas, so I came from Manila at that time. I found out about his project in May, but around June or July, I got an email from GK asking if I could come and help him. So I said, I just got engaged and we're preparing to get married, but I can go over there from Manila. I can fly over to Dallas for 2 months. That's as long as I can stay there. And GK told me 2 months is enough, or 2 months is more than enough. Okay, so before I arrived, I found out that it was for those who were working on him. I found out that it was mostly fifth stratum textures, which would shift to second stratum textures. Okay, so that's what I began working with, and true enough, I would feel that mostly fifth stratum shifting to about second stratum. So when I arrived, it was predominantly about second stratum, both surface and deep. And that would be feeling the pulses before and after each session. So because it was mostly second stratum, as I mentioned, I gave to you the sequences that I applied. So it was, I made sure that I would do a third method of correction at least once per day. And by the way, third method of correction, the energy sphere that it focuses on would be the 13, the energy sphere number 13, which is also in second stratum. Okay, so I would also do the lumbar circle, which is for working on second stratum on the ascending side, which is kidney, spleen, and lung. I chose ascending because one of our focuses were on lungs. And so we would do the kidney, spleen, and lung combination and do the 23-25 and also the R&R applications in reverse order. And by the way, when you feel, this is something that Dr. King teaches also in the pulses class, when you usually feel a predominant texture in both surface and deep and in almost all fingers, all 6 fingers, it's usually indicative of a dysfunction or disharmony in the mediator energy. Okay, so the R&Rs are focused on the mediator energy. And so it also made sense to use the R&R applications. And we would employ the R&R sequences in reverse order. So we're not just talking about individual R&R applications. We're talking about doing all 5 applications in one session. Okay? So while I was doing this, of course, we would feel pulses before and after each session. And it's not always second stratum that was predominant. There were some days or some sessions that it was all silent pulses, or sometimes it would be first stratum pulses on certain stratums. What I would mean is, when your fingers are on the wrist, I would feel first stratum on certain fingers. Okay, so this would tell me, as I mentioned, that silent pulses will also tell you something and give you a clue on what to do. So I would usually apply the number one and the number one sequence and also the spleen sequence. So whenever we feel silent pulses, the number one and the spleen applications are usually the go-to or my go-to. And it helps, if I can use the term, jumpstart the pulses of the client or of that person. So usually when you apply the number one sequence or the spleen sequence or both applications, and then you feel the pulses again, you would usually feel the textures come out. Okay? So it really helps bring out the pulses, so to speak, when you have silent pulses. So that can be very useful, especially during times where you really can't feel anything. So one of the go-tos would be doing the number one and doing the spleen application. So something for you to take note of. Okay. It would usually shift back to second stratum, including those times when there were silent pulses. So it would shift back to second and sometimes fifth stratum textures. So if you remember the order of the pulses, usually it would go from 3 and then 5 and then 1 and then 2 and then 4. So far, this sort of makes sense that, it's mostly stuck in second stratum, but sometimes it goes back to fifth stratum. So this is still within the order of those pulses. Okay. And then, so as I mentioned, usually the last texture would be fourth stratum. So I would start to feel fourth stratum textures after each session. Okay, it's not necessarily after every session, but there were times when I would work and work and work and all of these applications, doing it, intensively, doing a thorough application. That's the word I was looking for. I was doing thorough applications And then sooner or later, rather than second stratum or going back to fifth stratum, I would start to feel fourth stratum textures after those sessions. Okay, especially when I was doing regeneration sequence, a thorough regeneration sequence. That's why I would say it's a very powerful application. It really changes things. You know, if you keep on working and working on someone with the same applications based on the pulses, and it doesn't really seem to change things, I would suggest also trying a regeneration sequence, especially if it makes sense. Okay, so meaning, so a regeneration sequence is a fourth stratum application, and it's also very powerful for the immune system, of course, and we're working with cancer, so it really makes sense in this case, okay? So, and even if it's not cancer, you can give it a try. You know, it will give you powerful results. That's all I can say. Okay, so I started feeling fourth stratum, and then gradually, you know, as the days went by, I started to get unmistakable fluff with tone after the session, especially when doing regeneration and the R&R sequences in reverse order. So that's why these are very powerful applications. So I underlined unmistakable. So unmistakable fluff with tone. So how was I sure that what I was feeling, or what the texture that I was feeling, was fluff with tone and not the other five textures? Okay, so that is actually, for me, that is a good question, because sometimes, especially when I started, my personal experiences, I wasn't sure if I was really feeling fluff with tone. So the way I uh, I approached it is, it was a process of elimination. So it really helped that prior to this, I was feeling a lot of second stratum and fifth stratum pulses, because sometimes these are the textures that can be mistaken for fluff with tone, in my experience. Okay, so I know that it's definitely not a tingle, because a tingle is usually an electric sensation. I know it's definitely not fourth stratum, because fourth stratum is a lacking sensation. Sometimes you're not really sure that there's a texture there, but you know, there's something that comes out once in a while. It's not silent, but something seems to pop out once in a while. That's fourth stratum. So I know, okay, another thing that can be another texture that may be confused would be third stratum, which is puff. But as I described it, puff is usually, for me, it feels like a balloon expanding and deflating. So it's definitely not that. So it's just really, for me, it was a matter of eliminating these different textures. So for me, fluff with tone feels like something very relaxing. You know, sometimes the other pulses, the other textures, it feels like they're hurried, they're in a rush, they're very intense sometimes. Um, so you know, your second stratum would be boop 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 boop. Your fifth stratum would be boop 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 boop. But fluff with tone is just very tranquil. It's very harmonious. You know, I try to imagine the waves in a beach. You know, the calm waves in a beach. So to me, that's what fluff with tone felt like. So it was very distinct from the five different textures. So I'm mentioning this just so that you would also have an idea on, again, my thought process, and you know, how I approached the project, and how I approached discerning pulses. So it started to become a pattern. You know, I would start to get unmistakable fluff with tone more and more often, you know, and finally it got to a point where it became more consistent fluff with tone after sessions within 2 months of starting. And just right before I flew back to Manila, which is in October 2015. So, that's what we want, of course, is to feel fluff with tone after every session. So that was actually a very good thing. You know, physically, what I could say is physically, if were to describe him, he was a mess. Even after the 2 months that I worked on him, he was in a lot of pain. He was really suffering. Very weak, very frail. But based on the pulses that I was feeling on him, you know, uh, I don't think I ever told him about it. I told him while I was working on him. But, deep down inside, I knew that things were going to get better. Just because of the pulses that I was feeling on him, especially the consistent fluff with tone after the sessions towards the end of the 2 months. So I said to myself, he may look like a mess right now, but when I started, I had this sort of feeling at the back of my head that he's in a big mess. Actually, one of the main reasons, the driving factors that led me to fly from Manila was the thought that I may not see him again. That may be the last time I may see him again, because this was something very serious. Okay, but towards the towards the end of my time in Dallas working on him in 2015, I was confident that he was gonna get better, even if we weren't really seeing much physical changes. And so, to make the long story short, this was October 2015. So about 3 months after, I believe he started to make an announcement towards the end of January or about February 2016. He made an announcement that he was completely cancer free. And so that just confirmed what I felt, before I left him, that things were headed in the right direction. Okay, so praise God for that. And I wanted to use his case as an example for you today. We can learn a lot about discerning pulses from this. So we saw, I don't think that every project will be a good example of the order of pulses, but this is actually a very good example of how the textures progress. It goes from 3, 5, 1, 2, 4, and then fluff with tone. So that I just wanted to use that so that it confirms what the textbooks say, the TKM textbooks say, and what Dr. King explains in his class. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted this to be a supplement, since Dr. King is teaching about pulses today. And I don't know if some of you who are attending right now are part of the class, watching online or even in class. But I just wanted this to be something different, and something that supports what Dr. King is teaching right now. So I believe that's it. Okay. So if you have any questions, we have about 15 minutes before they go back to class. Thank you for your comment, Cindy. I think of fluff with tone as a sine wave. Yeah, that's a good description, actually. If you know what the sine wave is, if you Google it, it's the classic. When you talk about waves, it's how a classic wave would look like. Definitely. And if I were to share my own description, also same as the waves in a beach, every peak of that sine wave would be the peak of that wave. on the beach, for example. So it's something very harmonious. Okay. So thank you very much for your feedback. I hope that really helped. And again, discerning pulses is very important, especially when you're working with more serious projects like cancer. It really gives you an idea of what to do. Of course, there are so many different applications, TKM applications, and for every, for every texture that you feel, like for example, second stratum, if you're feeling predominant second stratum, there is not one specific application that you must do based on what you're feeling. Okay, so it's you have a choice. You always have a choice what application you can use, but discerning pulses just helps you narrow it down. Okay, so that's all that discerning pulses really does, is it helps narrow down your choices. Now it's also based on your understanding of TKM that comes into play. So the more the more you learn about TKM and how everything is correlated to each other, the more you can work, or the more applications that you can choose from which are effective. But what I can say is no matter what you choose, what application you choose, it always helps the person. Okay, it always helps the energetic system of that person. So everything is correlated. Okay, it's just a matter of how quickly you get the results. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for your time. I'll be here for about 5 or 10 minutes in case there are any questions. Hope you learned a lot from this, and I hope you have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Let me just close this in prayer. Thank you, Jesus, for this time. I thank you for everyone who has attended. I pray that what the story I told based on example would be very helpful, and it would also encourage everyone to learn about discerning pulses, and also encourage them um, in their study of pulses, in their current understanding and discernment of pulses. I pray that you would help them also, especially if they desire to discern pulses even more, Lord, because this is all glorifying you and how you created our body. Also, thank you so much for your goodness and your faithfulness to each and everyone. This I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you all. Bye bye.